Hello and welcome to this recording of the Pitch Your Research training workshop that we did. So who am I? Well, my name is Martijn Bousset and I'm a lecturer at the Maastricht University, and I mainly teach math courses like calculus, linear algebra, numerical mathematics. And you might wonder why I tell you this. Well, I became a lecturer after I did my master's in mathematical engineering and a PhD in signal processing. I tell you this because I'm not a communications major that's going to tell you you need to do it like this and this. No, I'm a PhD and I was a postdoc, right? So I went through the same things as you are going through right now. And I want to share what I have learned about pitching. Okay, so first off, what is a pitch? Well, you could define a pitch as a short presentation with the goal of getting the audience to act in a certain way. Okay, so I highlighted a few words in there. So it has to be short. So short typically means 1 to 3 minutes, right? And you can think of this as if you would write down the pitch. 1 minute is about 150 words, 3 minutes is about 450 words maximum, right? So it's very, very short. And this immediately leads to the audience, because it's very important to really know your audience. You need to know what their prior knowledge is, because you only have such a short amount of time to do this pitch. You really need to know, what do they already know? What is their prior knowledge? And you also need to know what they care about, because in that way you can more easily engage them. And finally, well, in the end you have a certain goal in mind, right? So you want to achieve something with this pitch. You want the audience to act in a certain way. And for example, that could be that you want them to give their attention to a certain cause that's important for you. Maybe you have some kind of societal or ecological or economical cause with your research, and you want people to give this attention. Or maybe you want them to understand something. Maybe you have developed a new algorithm or a new approach, and you want people to understand how it works and how it's different from the state of the art. And finally, you also want people, you might want the audience to take action, right? For example, maybe you have built a suite of algorithms and you want people to use those algorithms, right? So a pitch is a short presentation with the goal of getting the audience to act in a certain way. Okay, why do we care about pitches, right? So now we know what a pitch is, but so what? Why would I care about it? Well, you hope that you will generate more of 3 things, broadly speaking. You would like to have more support for your research, right? You want support from your colleagues, your peers, but also your promoter or promoters, your superiors, other professors in the department or the faculty or external professors. And support is also related to recognition, right? Which is also very important. You also want to have more discussion, because if more people talk about your research, you might learn something, you might see a new research direction. So discussion is really good. And also, quite important, is funding. Right? So typically, if you need to get some funding for your research, then you typically also have to do some kind of a pitch. So the better you are at pitches, probably it will be easier for you to get some funding for your research. So there are some very good reasons to be able to pitch in a good way. Now, the goal of this training is to provide you with the means to create your own pitches, right? I'm not going to create a pitch for you. You will have to do the work yourself. And this workshop actually has 3 parts. And the first part is about fundamentals, and that's this presentation. So I will try to provide a conceptual framework that you can use to think about pitches. That's the goal of this presentation. And then there's also a template that allows you to create your own pitch. And I will make this template available together with this presentation. And then when we did the on-site workshop, there was also a tryout and a feedback session, but that will not be part of this presentation. Okay, so here we focus on the fundamentals, and I will also make this template available. Good. With this training, I actually want to convince you that being a good pitcher has a lot to do with skeletons. And here you see a skeleton, right? Let's call this skeleton Jack, right? It's a good name for a skeleton. So it's Jack the skeleton. And Jack actually wants to become a good showman, right? And a showman is someone who is really good at presenting stuff, who is really good at telling engaging stories, who is really good at telling entertaining stories, right? So the skeleton, Jack, wants to become a showman. Now, in order to get there, there is a certain journey that he has to take, right? There are certain steps he has to go through. And actually, there are 5 steps to go through. Now, you see that Jack is already at step 2. So he's a little bit ahead of himself. So we need to take one step back. We need to go one step back to the first step in the journey. And in this first step, we will think about the topical questions, the 5 W's, right? And what are these? Well, it's what, why, who, where, and when. These are the topical questions. And you first need to answer these 5 questions before you start developing a pitch, before you start thinking about a pitch. You need to think about these, right? So the what question tells you, okay, what are you going to talk about? And this is really important because you have only 1 to 3 minutes. So you need to delimit, you need to set boundaries about what you're going to talk about. So the what question is quite important. It delimits the topic. Then the why question is also very important because that relates to your goal. What are you trying to achieve with this, right? Remember the 3 examples that I gave, right? It could be funding, it could be support, it could be discussion, or maybe there are some personal goals that you have, right? So you need to know what you're talking about and why you're talking about it. You need to have this very clearly in your mind because it will guide how we will construct the pitch. And then the third one is who. And who is very important, right? Because that relates to your target audience. And as I said before, you need to know what is the prior knowledge of the audience you're talking to. Because you have only such limited amount of time, you really need to get that straight. And you also need to know what they care about. Because if you know what they care about, you can make your pitch engaging and they will listen more to you. And then there's also the where and the when, right? So why is this important? Well, when has to do with how much time you have, right? If you have 1 minute or you have 3 minutes, that's a world of difference, right? That's really 1 minute or 3 minutes. Really try to make a pitch for 1 minute and try to make a pitch for 3 minutes, right? And you will be so happy with those 2 extra minutes. So it's really important that you know exactly how much time you have. That's one thing. But it's also interesting to know when your pitch is, because sometimes you have conferences where multiple people can give a pitch after each other, maybe 20 people. And if you're the first, well, that's nice because then people will still have a lot of attention. But if you're the last one, yeah, maybe people will not pay attention that much anymore. So you need to know where you are and you need to adapt to that accordingly. And then the where is also important because, well, are you on a stage, on a conference, right? And you have to give your pitch for the entire audience, or is it in the hallway when you're talking to a professor, or is it at a social event? So all of these things matter. These determine the circumstances under which you are giving your pitch, right? Now, this is what we call the planning phase, right? You need to plan your pitch. You need to know where you're going to give the pitch. Now, the next step is about designing the pitch, right? That's step 2. And that's where Jack the Skeleton was at. And why did I use this metaphor of a skeleton? Well, because the skeleton of each pitch is very simple. It always has 3 parts. It has a problem, a solution, and a benefit, right? This is the main basic structure of each pitch. It's the skeleton of each pitch. And using this skeleton, you will be able to adapt your pitch to the circumstances that are determined right, by your answers to the questions in the previous step. But this is the main skeleton of every pitch. So there's a problem, right? There's something you're tackling. What's the problem? And then secondly, there's a solution. You have proposed a solution, and this solution hopefully has some kind of benefit. Now, let me give you an example. I did a PhD in signal processing, and at some point I was working on a problem in biomedical signal processing. What we were trying to do is, we want to analyze the heart activity of a fetus. And you can do that by using an electrocardiogram. So you put a number of sensors on the pregnant woman's body, and this will measure the ECG signal. But there's a problem, because when you do this, you measure both the ECG signal, or the heart activity, of the mother and of the fetus at the same time. And these two signals are mixed together. That's a problem, because we only want, of course, the signal of the fetus if we want to analyze the heart activity of the fetus. So the solution is, there are algorithms, there are methods that allow us to extract the fetal ECG. And the benefit of that, now we can do a proper analysis of the fetal heart activity and make a diagnosis. So that's a very basic problem, solution, and benefit. And I have this idea in my mind, and depending on the situation, I will create my pitch differently. And that brings us to the next part, the creating of the pitch. And you can see this as the step between the skeleton and the showman. Before we can go to the showman, we need to put some muscles and some fat on this skeleton, right? We need to flesh out the skeleton. And then afterwards, we can put some clothes and a nice hat and a wand for this showman to do his tricks. But first we need to flesh out the pitch a little bit. And when you do this, you really need to take into account who your target audience is. Right? What is their prior knowledge and what do they care about? And this guides how you will create your pitch, but you'll always use the same skeleton structure. Let me give you an example. If I would give a pitch to a layman audience, someone who doesn't really have a lot of prior knowledge about this problem, then again I would say, look, if we measure this electrocardiogram, we have a mixture of the signal. It's a mixture of the heart activity of the fetus and the heart activity of the mother, right? But we have algorithms, we have methods to extract that, and this allows us to help save lives. Right? That's a very general pitch that you could use for a layman audience. Now, if I would be talking to doctors specifically, then I would change it a little bit, because what these methods allow me to do is basically an automatic pre-processing. Right? Before, a doctor had to look at these ECG recordings and see what was happening and do a manual analysis. Now we can do an automatic pre-processing, split the signals or extract the FEC, the fetal ECG signal, and then the doctor can do whatever he needs to do with this signal. So it saves time, right? So I have the same problem and the same solution, obviously, but I change the benefit depending on who I'm talking to, what their prior knowledge and what they care about. Doctors care about something else than the layman audience. Now, if I would be talking to signal processing people, then I would say something like, look, this problem can actually be formulated as a blind source separation problem. This is a very classical problem in signal processing, so they know about this. And I can tell them, what we're actually doing is trying to solve a blind source separation problem. And so you see that it really depends on who you're talking to. At this point, I'm always using the same skeleton, but I'm fleshing out the skeleton in different ways depending on the audience. Now, the next step is the delivery. And the delivery has to do with the showman, with the making it entertaining or engaging. It depends on the setting, of course. And showmanship has to do, broadly speaking, with four things, right? There's story, there's body language, there's the usage of your voice, and there's practice. I think these four elements are really important in showmanship. So what do I mean with the story? Well, depending on the setting, of course, you could weave a narrative around your pitch. For example, recently I had to do this pitch for a layman audience, and I would set the story as follows. I would say, well, look, I have this when I was doing this research and these kinds of methods, I had a friend, and she was called Emma, and she got pregnant, and she was going to the doctors, and at some point they discovered that there might be something wrong with the heart of the fetus, and so they needed to do this analysis. And so Emma was very worried about this, and I talked to her about it, and well, I thought, okay, well, these kinds of methods that I'm developing, I'm using them for other kinds of signal processing problems, but I could also use them for this, right? And help these kinds of people. So I weave a story around it, I make it personal, and this is very engaging for a layman audience. What you could also do is try to use your body language, right? And you can get very creative with this, obviously. But for example, something that I used here is, it's a mixture of body and voice language. That's, in this case, we're trying to analyze the heart activity. And why is that? Well, because we want to see if there are irregular heartbeats. And so in that case, I would say, well, look, broadly speaking, irregular heartbeats means that your heart is beating too fast, da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. And I would smack my chest in accordance with the beat, right? Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. And maybe the heartbeat is too slow, da-dum, da-dum, and so on. Or maybe it's very irregular, da-dum, da-dum, right? It's doing very weird stuff. So you're using your body and you're using your voice to emphasize certain parts in your pitch. And that makes it a little bit more interactive, a little bit more engaging for the audience, to make them pay attention. And then the final part, which is really, really important, is practice, right? You need to practice this pitch many, 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 many times. That's the only way how you can really get it into your system and make it come out very naturally, right? Because you don't want to sound like a robot, you want to make it sound natural. And in order to do that, you have to practice a lot. And my tips for this is, well, whenever I have a pitch, well, first I try it out by myself. Then I try it out in front of the mirror and I try to look at myself and to see how I look like when I do this pitch and look myself in the eye. Then a third thing you could do is you can try to pitch and record yourself using your webcam and then afterwards analyze and see where things are getting unclear or where you're doing weird things. So that's also a really good analysis tool, right? Record yourself using your webcam. And then the next step is to try it out with peers, right? Could be friends, could be colleagues, and then also try it out with superiors. Try it out with your promoter, for example. Okay, so that's delivery. Then we get to the final step, and the final step is anticipation. So what do I mean with this? Well, you see that I centered the skeleton and the showman, right, in this way. And I said, okay, there's a step before we do anything, but there's actually also a step after we have done things. And these things are often forgotten. That's why I emphasized it a little bit. What do I mean with anticipating? Well, when you do a pitch, that's not the end of the story, right? It's not like, here's my pitch and now I'm leaving and that's it. No, you do your pitch and then typically there are questions, right? If you did a good job with your pitch, then hopefully people will have questions, right? Then you get some interaction, you get some questions, and you need to prepare for that, right? So a good tip is to have like a number of typical questions that different types of people could have, to have them in your mind and to have a good response to that. So that's about questions. And on the other hand, there's also a follow-up. So you did your pitch and then what, right? Like I said in the beginning, you have a certain goal in mind. There's a why to why you're doing this pitch. And how are you going to take care of that follow-up? For example, if I'm pitching a software package that I made during my PhD, well, then I want to make it as easy as possible for the listener to get to that software. So maybe I have a business card with a GitHub repository so they can easily access it or something. But you need to have a follow-up in mind related to your goal. So this is what I basically call the parable of the skeleton who wanted to become a showman, right? As you can see, there are 5 stages to developing this pitch. There's a planning step, there's a designing step, creating your basic skeleton of your pitch, then fleshing it out in the creating step, then there's delivery, and then there's anticipating questions and follow-up. All right. Thank you for listening. Good luck with getting to your perfect pitch.